Hello, Željko. Thank you so much for joining me today. And thank you so much, everybody, for watching. It is a pleasure as always. And I think we have an absolute banger. Everybody knows my favorite word, banger, but I think we've got one coming today. So usually we don't do big, long introductions and stuff. But I think, Željko, you have such an interesting blend of what you're working on, how you're thinking about what you're working on. So I think we need to spend a bit of time to kind of understand really who you're coming from, who you are, and your way of thinking about our world of platform engineering. So, thank you so much for joining. Maybe we start right there.
Thank you, Sam. Thanks for having me. I make a brief introduction about what I'm currently doing. So I work for a company called Aviv Group, which is a collection of multiple brands in real estate classifieds business. Originally started by independent companies, acquired as a group, and then recently years also trying to transform them into one platform that could serve multiple markets. My role is currently as a dual. So I started as a chief group architect, so working with the small center of excellence of solution architects, staff plus engineers. But also last year, I also took over managing as a director of platform, our called platform engineering scope, also covering topics related to DevOps, QA, web foundations, and a couple of others. Before that, I also worked with eBay Classifieds and Adevinta, which are similar in terms of setting. They are kind of groups, acquired lots of different companies in kind of classified business, of course, different verticals, different business goals, but similar level of complexity. So international companies with lots of history and lots of dynamics and lots of challenges, both in architecture and in platform engineering.
I think history is the key word for really what I wanted to talk about. When we first had our conversation, the amount of different acquisitions, mergers, divestments, the kind of the nature of working at one of these corporate groups. I used to work at one. I used to work at the Adecco Group years ago, and it felt like we were in a constant state of transformation, which means new companies coming in, new brands coming in, lots of legacy. Of course, that's the nature of us in Europe. They're like sometimes 100 years worth of legacy to map through. And when we have our kind of platform engineering roundtables, that's usually the thing many people struggle with. They're like, hey, I'm trying to build a platform. You're telling me, oh, let's centralize this, let's streamline this, let's focus on this. But oftentimes we have new companies that are being acquired all the time. We have companies that are being divested. So I really couldn't probably think of anyone better to delve into this than you. So I want to just start right there and really understand like what makes platform engineering different when you're working at one of these big group companies where you need to be thinking about acquisitions, you need to be thinking about divestments. Like how does that change the way you think about your platform?
Yeah, I mean, maybe just to clarify what I mean by group, and then it'll help to understand what's different. So typically, when big company doing mergers acquisitions, you normally have the core. You have core business companies much bigger, and it acquires some smaller one to get extra line of business to expand the customer base. But normally you have big stable core, and acquired company will then slowly adapt there. So normally they say the company that acquires will have a platform, and then you normally have like transition period where then acquired company will slowly adapt and acquire, maybe change a bit, but more or less adapt the processes, tools, culture of the new company. What is very different for groups that I work here is that these companies grow not by having one big company acquiring others. So you normally have independent companies. Then there was some bigger investment, which is not necessarily the core business. So for instance, for Avi Group, that was Axel Springer, was acquiring company in real estate classified business. And these companies are pretty similar in size. So what then happened is that you end up, instead of having one big company acquiring the other smaller one, you actually end up with 3, 4, 5 companies of similar size and complexity. As long as you keep them independent, that's not the problem. But of course, that's the whole challenge and the opportunity here. Of course, once when you have them acquired, once when you consolidate financing, then you also see the opportunities because you acquire similar companies. They are doing similar things. So there is, of course, the word synergy pops up here. Frequently, also management consultants come in here. They build a case saying, look, we are doing different, same things all over the place. So there is a huge opportunity to actually bundle together what you have, build it once, and share it. So that kind of is one aspect. So there is no one dominant player that will define how things are going to work. There is definitely opportunity, and there is a pressure, expectation from investors, not just to acquire company to have them, but actually to transform them to become more efficient and generate these both opportunities and synergies. And then when you think about, so this is, I would say, groups are kind of organizations that benefit incredibly well if you would be able to build a platform there, because then you can get all of these synergies in place. So not just on technical level, but also you can think like business capabilities. You can actually build it once and have like business platform used to combine and build it, and then also technical ones. But it's also companies that are probably the most difficult one to have this platform built, because, as I said, there's no one standard starting point. Even when there is a bigger acquisition, normally it's not 90 to 10, it's like 60 to 40 or 50 to 50. So then you end up with instantly incredibly diverse landscape without obvious consolidation points. If you want like to go toward one direction, there's no obvious candidate here. So then it becomes very big challenge, both organizationally, culturally, politically, and technically, to introduce more convergence, more standardization, and so forth. So that's maybe in a nutshell, I think, the biggest difference. And then you always have, that's why transformation is always mentioned in the context of groups, because you never acquire a company just to keep them together, but because differences are so huge, there is no some kind of incremental iterative way to emerge somewhere which will be more aligned, less duplicated, more efficient. So then you always almost immediately start with some kind of transformation program aiming to either standardize things, to leverage economy of scale, merge some things, and so forth. So that's another aspect. And maybe another one I'll just add here and then resume in the question is also that timeline and stability is also missing here. So normally, as I said, normal acquisition, big company acquires small one, and this company stays doing what doing longer. In group setting, you can have as frequent acquisitions as divestments, and it could be like in a timeline of a couple of years. So suddenly you actually acquire companies, you manage to make some transformation progress, you build something shared, you onboard people on the shared one, and then there is decision, actually we want to divest one brand. And then it becomes a very interesting challenge, because suddenly this brand is not very more independent. It has huge dependency on central platforms, central capabilities. They even like get some people relocated or they left company because there's no any more need for them to have it. And now suddenly they need to become dependent, scale up organizationally, get copy of platform which is actually not intended to support one small brand independently, and that also is another challenge. I think this is kind of illustrates a bit of some of the key challenges, these topics which I'm dealing with like daily in the last couple of years.
I mean, I honestly, it's such a funny kind of situation to be in, where of course you as a platform engineer, like your ambition, you just want to build the best, most effective platform possible. And in many organizations, that can often, not to say simple, obviously, it's still incredibly difficult. But for many, the kind of the path laid out for them that they should take is often reasonably clear. They might have one kind of aspect that's more dominant. So you check, well, is this actually the most effective? If it is, then you go for it. But really, what do you do? How do you pick that path forward? I kind of, now that I've got you here, want to pick your brain on that. So, you know, an engineer's often approach is, well, what is the one that we're already doing the most that is working the best? We go for that. So how do you determine if you've got multiple different paths that are all kind of, maybe they're working, maybe they're not working? Is it a measurement question? Is it just a, you as a leader have to make a decision question? You know, how do you approach that kind of situation?
Yeah, it is. It's always difficult exercise. It's not only engineering and technical. And I would maybe say like, I've tried in my kind of last years, kind of like almost all possible approaches how you could do it. So one, of course, is looking like big bang, like why don't we just rebuild it from scratch? Now we have all these things. why would we just learn it and then build it properly, serve it one? It's like almost never an option because you don't have the time. And there is the other option is look at the best. Let's say you select, okay, we have like 5-10 companies. Let's see what's the best platform, trying to then leverage that one, make it more generic, and then onboard the others. And the third approach is more saying, okay, do it gradually. So then you normally look at the way how you could slice what you have in different, in our case, like kind of capabilities, like product bricks capabilities, and then that you could modernize and aim to converge slice by slice rather than doing it like in Big Bang or trying to align everyone on one platform. And I have to admit, both empirically and theoretically, I cannot say that one of these approaches is better or worse. So there is, I have mixed feelings. I've tried kind of everything. We tried all approaches in different settings, and they always kind of, there is some progress. There is definitely you learn a lot, you deliver some value, but it always is shorter than you expect because there are so many unexpected changes, so many directional, like U-turns, also strategically as well as technologically. So what definitely helps is modeling. So basically using lots of data, making sure that you understand what you have, where you want to go. But it's not enough to do it only technically. So you cannot just look at the infrastructure, source code. You need to really get finance, product, business involved. And also, I would say the most critical aspect is to really aim on this holistically, because it's the way how you manage group when you have one platform, like business-wise, is completely different than how you manage individual brands. And what one like anti-pattern I've noticed is that frequently we say, let's just technically modernize platform, we get the synergies, but we want to keep running local businesses as we were running it before, just with one platform. And it frequently backfires because exactly the shameless platform is that you need to give up something to get something back. So you get much more power, genericity. You can change things once and get it there. But if you want to keep every minor feature locally, that will create as more complexity frequently than before that. So it is when I look back in like a platform engineering aspect. So that's like very, I mean, platform here I talk about two levels. So there's technical platform, and there is a business platform, like business capability platform, which is both important. So what, well, like I say, it's always struggle. You need to look at data, you need to involve multiple stakeholders, and you need to create frequent feedback loops, and you need to be ready that maybe 6 months down the road or year down the road, you may go in different direction and not to be surprised by that. So that's not sure if that's
Well,
not maybe concrete answer, but I think gives a bit of the
I think, I
feeling
mean,
about
the nature of platform engineering, that's really the only answer one can give. I know everyone listening, of course, everyone who ever talks to me at a conference wants me to just tell them, yeah, A plus B equals C. There you go. This is what you do. But that's not the nature of things. There is no immediate clear answer. Every organization is different. Every situation is different. I guess the question when you talk about, being ready 6 months or 1 year from now for the change of plan, the shift of motion, I think that same way of operating, I guess, must be useful when you're having to think about a divestment approach, because that's the other angle of this. You're building this super effective, quite centralized platform. You've maybe onboarded loads of an organization's apps on it and now has loads of dependencies in relation to your overall platform. And now you're like, okay, we need to divest them. They're being sold off or they're being spun out. What really do you do? You mentioned some of the challenges to that, but I'm curious about the solutions. How do you even begin to approach a divestment like that from an IT standpoint?
It is always difficult one. Good thing normally about divestments, mergers, acquisitions, of course, companies are aware that there is a complexity. Normally you have transition period, 12, 6, 18, 20, 24 months to do all of these things. I think what could help is simply to think about it and have a couple of options ready. So one option would be like to really have this strategically baked into what you're building. So for instance, you could build a platform as kind of like you are building it for as independent software as a service company. So like you, with the Amazon build with AWS services, is so that when there is divestment, you could aim to have a contract and sell this as a product to others. So I think that's one approach where you could actually build some of the services in a way that you could license or have a contract for longer periods, so that then you are not anymore the same company. You just pay for services that you previously used out of it. But the other is, of course, to kind of limit some elegant choices. For instance, going for like no duplication and so forth, efficiency in resources, to actually sacrifice some of the criteria, so make it a bit more redundant, maybe deploy things twice rather than once, so that if there is option, then you can more easily cut things out. For instance, what we are currently also doing is we kind of prepare infrastructure in a way that we deploy things. So we build everything in one source code, but deploy it differently. So we could relatively quickly get infrastructural components running independently for country while keeping the ownership code centrally, so that you can do it in 2 steps. So you first transfer one aspect, so all the code and data, they became quickly independent, and then you take longer to transfer the intellectual property and ownership. But the point is, yeah, you need to bit understand where things are going, prepare a bit, have a couple of options, at least name them, you then do it. Understand also a bit of the, that also for me, learning exercise. Like for instance, investments dynamics and what is expected, what is actually valued, how is your company being valued? Like, is it valued on growth, or is it valued on like EBITDA, where it's more like cost efficient? And that creates also interesting framework which help you to make decisions. If you value for growth, you need to prioritize ease of integrations, but it will be less efficient, it will be messy, it will cost more, but you can quicker get expansions or acquisitions, and then you're going to pay later on something. If it's more investment based on EBITDA, evaluation is based on EBITDA, which is basically looking at the profit and the cost there, then you actually have more variables, but also more opportunities to increase the valuation of company without necessarily sacrificing that. So that's, I think, also important to factor in here, because if the cost efficiency is important, then yeah, you may increase dependency to get bigger valuation, but then you'll pay later on by more effort to decouple. If the growth is more important, then you actually can keep things independent and grow by duplicating, copying things, but it will, on the short term, create lots of inefficiency. So no kind of concrete formulas here, just look at multiple dimensions. Finding financial dimension is very important here. Investment dimension is very important here. And don't never lose this loop. So it's not enough just at the beginning of transformation to look at the strategy. Every like 6-12 months, you need to be part of discussions and understanding how market is changing, how our investment relationships are changing, and then anticipate a bit what's going to happen.
Well, I think that also, you know, of course, the dream would be able to give a super specific, this is just what you do. But I think what you talked about there speaks to one of the things I notice a lot of platform engineers really struggle with, and that's thinking about the business implications or business ramifications or even just business side of many of these things. And when I talk to platform engineers and they're trying to understand their, you know, the goals for their platform, how their platform should be structured or what they should be thinking about, I ask, well, what are the business goals of your organization? Because that will shape it. And oftentimes they have no idea. They're very kind of technically oriented. And when you start to really think about, okay, we need to think about our platform strategy in relation to a divestment. And it's like, well, what is the strategy for the divestment as a whole? That is what will then step down into helping teams technically understand the way they should approach it. And I think for anyone who is more on the practitioner side listening to that, I think this is a really strong emphasis on why you need to be understanding what those business goals are, because they will trickle down to what your technical goals should be. Even all the way down to thinking about minute things like your feature path. You know, when you're thinking about your platform as a product and you're determining, you know, what is that product map for it, or roadmap, excuse me, that should be determined all the way down from the business goals. And when you think large scale like divestments or acquisitions, it's the exact same thing. What I'm curious about here is really when you think about the kind of investment side from a leadership, because of course it seems to me like there's a huge risk in this case of like massively over investing into elements of a platform that might then get spun out or might then have your resources severed from separation. Or maybe you need to spend too much time. Like if you're spending all your time thinking about how do you spin these things off, well, then you're not really creating net new value potentially for the platform. But the counter side of that, it seems to me like there's a huge risk of underinvesting if you're so afraid of, oh, we're going to divest stuff off, or this might be split, or we need to focus on this divestment approach or fixing this merger point. How do you make sure that you're really investing in keeping your platform as up to date technically as it can be, that it's constantly growing, improving, doing new things? So, how do you kind of manage that investment balance in an environment like you're in?
Yeah, this is always a challenging balance. Maybe we'll start with over-investing. I think there any platform attempt is prone to over-investing in multiple ways, because what particularly if you also expand platform to business capabilities, what you want to build is like generic component, which is always more complex, more challenging to build than kind of more specific one. And I think there are a number of things. I frequently quote this from Fred Brooks, Mythical Man. He has this second system effect. What frequently happens now, if teams that build one platform for something specific, they always have thoughts about doing it more generic, but of course you have very concrete problem, very concrete uses. Now, if these teams get opportunity to build it again, but now more generically, that could become pretty over-engineered. So you end up in this speculative like generality anti-pattern, where you're building lots of things because maybe there'll be some case there. So I think I think the biggest risk of over-investing is, I would say, complexity that it could create, a dependency that it could create, and wasted opportunities, because it is always cost, particularly in this kind of group setting, dynamic setting, it costs you always much more than you expected. So that's that happens a lot, and I've seen, unfortunately, most of these anti-patterns there. On the other hand, underinvesting is also a problem. As you said, there's a huge opportunity space to optimize things when you are together, because now you have consolidated finances, consolidated reporting lines. You really can make some big changes that none of other companies cannot do, because they need to do contracts there. And like, for instance, just economy of scale is one factor that immediately plays in your aspect. So at least you can negotiate properly at a procurement, for instance, relationship is some kind of low-hanging fruit. You can actually achieve lots of interesting results simply by renegotiating contracts without changing architecture. And actually being part of the discussion could also be interesting for platform engineers and architects as well to join. And maybe one lesson I learned here about underinvesting. Frequently, underinvesting happens because of fear. Because of course, I burn my fingers a lot on these things. So then, in the beginning, I was much more enthusiastic, starting being part of projects. Now, of course, much more moderate about it. So this fear is actually very real, and you have lots of, for good reasons, people that will push back and say, "Look, no empirical evidence that it could ever work." On the other hand, look, there are some areas, like, for instance, consolidate on cloud provider, if you don't have significant things to migrate, is a low-hanging fruit. And what I maybe learned is that people appreciate in these situations more clarity about less preferred option than uncertainty. And I think what frequently happens is that people know we will maybe consolidate, and as long as you have multiple options happening, there's lots of back and forth, lots of noise, lots of friction. Once when you make decision and you back it up to go in one direction, you have 1 or 2 weeks of extra noise, and then people start actually to work more creatively how to do it. So this is kind of, in a way, maybe a couple of thoughts about this aspect. I think, unfortunately, I have to admit I've seen more of overinvestment in the context of group settings than underinvestment, because, as I said, when there is a big investment to create a group, there's also expectation that you are going to create something different, to create more synergies, and start now and generate some kind of return investment in 6 months or 12 or soon. So I think if I need to choose where to focus, I was focusing on preventing overinvestment, and underinvestment is, of course, a real issue, but less of a problem. Just need to do need to dare to do something and learn from it. But
so what would be some of your tips and tricks? I mean, you talked about at the beginning being super excited, lots of overinvestment mistakes. So I'm curious, what are some of the things that you already look out for? Say an acquisition has happened. What are you thinking about to make sure that you're not overinvesting?
I think it's really starting from the business product vision goals rather than technical opportunities, because some of the biggest, maybe the most influential architecture decisions were actually understanding business goals and maybe deciding not to do something completely, for instance. And that is kind of type of decision that you can easily miss if you focus on technical opportunities. You analyze source code, you analyze infrastructure, you see, hey, if we merge these servers and then without actually asking questions, actually, do we need that server or not? So I would say that's maybe really spending much more time in the beginning, both with product, finance, procurement, business stakeholder, investors, to understand what we really want to achieve and look for opportunities that could then lead to simplification of our technical landscape, and then look at what's remaining and try to invest in that. And I would say frequently this overinvestment happens exactly if there is misbalance in dynamics on, let's say, product and business vision and technical, because frequent tech people, they of course need to understand technical, they integrate. If you normally have enough people, then you then start to do something, you create a roadmaps, and business may be still reluctant to commit to vision of one platform or shared vision about global work. And you need to really be sensitive, understand that there's still lots of back and forth on business product vision before you create roadmap transformation plans on technical ones. So I think that would be number one. Really spend, particularly like I'm chief architect, but also I would say in like senior engineers should be more sensitive to the area where you may try to do something that technically makes sense, but you then have zero guarantees that it's actually backed up by future plans of the business and product leaders.
Well, I think I was about to say, you have an advantage of being both the architecture leader and also a platform leader. Maybe you're going to tell me it's not an advantage. Actually, it's a nightmare and you don't want to do it. But I will say you're in a unique role often that you get to own architecture. You also own the platform. And you've written a fantastic book, Grounded Architecture. So, architecture is a world that you are fully enmeshed in. And I'm curious about how much of an advantage that has been as a head of platform. Of course, architecture always kind of is a part of platform engineering to an extent. But I haven't yet met someone who has the clearly defined role of like, hey, I own both of these worlds. And so I'm constantly thinking about both of these worlds in one. I'm curious if that, like, what kinds of advantages that brings. Does it bring any challenges? And I'd love to hear a bit more about your book and like some of the stuff that you've thought about that you put in there.
Yeah, I mean, the main kind of driver and how I look at my position is impact that you make in an organization. And depending on organization, you may have it both formal and informal ways. So when I was working at eBay Classifieds at the Vinta period, I was actually single individual contributor, but I have virtual team of virtual architecture team, about 50, 60 architects that are coordinating. And in this setting, I was actually able to make lots of impacts. In the current setting, where I actually acquired also formal reporting lines of in platform engineering, that actually has, in my context, helped to have broader impact, because one of the issues I ended as a chief architect with Architecture Center of Excellence is being too distant from the teams and the way how they implement things that you work out. Of course, I always look at data, so I'm very close to the engine in terms of observing, but then when you actually need to implement change and bring it there, that always became some kind of complicated exercise with program managers, because you have always 30, 40 teams that need to be coordinated, and then your kind of influencer role, central role became more difficult to have actual impact. So you see things early, you understand what's going on, you can define direction. So that having a formal reporting line and setting I have of platform engineers, which actually have impact on defining the basic building blocks we are going to use, both technically, infrastructurally, as well as to degree of like shared services helps a lot to accelerate having impact, because you can quickly move from defining a plan to actually implementing and worked. Feedback loops are much shorter, and you actually build something in components that directly propagate as a kind of service or product to product piece to other ones. What is also working well is this kind of shorter feedback loops, and also that you can actually simplify governance, because you, instead of having architecture review boards, golden paths documented and then educate, you can actually build them in the platforms. You can make sure that whatever you're building is actually prevents you of deviating from a particular way of working. So you can simplify governance, reduce bureaucracy and documentation. Of course, what you lose is a bit of this kind of independent objective part, because now you are part of what you kind of govern to a degree also what you're building yourself. So I think that also creates sometimes a bit dynamics where you may miss some things, or it's difficult to challenge some directions. Of course, you end up with lots of people management topics which are critical, and you need to attend there, which also then could lead to some compromises which you would not take if you're like more independent function, because then you have a kind of more principal goal and mandate, and you kind of evaluate it based on what's going on. Now you actually need to mix lots of different incentives and programs together. Overall, I do like this mix. I mean, like also the way, so basically understand architecture, understand the business, build all the relationships, and then take also more formal a leadership role. That I think works well in this context. But I would not necessarily say that this is kind of ideal path. I think career progression depends like really on company and how and culture, because as I said, in other contexts, as individual contributor, I was able to have exactly the same impact as now managing 100 people here. So you need to, for me, most motivates is impacts, and then depending on organization, you need to see how to get this impact. Do you really need to formally manage some part of organization and build something to have it, or you can build a relationship and align rituals in a way that you could achieve it also indirectly. It is like depends. That's kind of always the kind of typical consultant.
we
consultant.
could save everyone's time, because of course the answer to everything is always it depends.
But I think it's also one important. I think for like if I talk more from architecture perspective, I think even if people have long-term goal to be architects, even like individual contributor role, it is really incredibly beneficial if you take a bit more hands-on direct management role. You become much more pragmatic. You understand much more difficulties. You build different types of relationship organizations. Even if you don't stay long term there, you go back to the classical architectural or like other role. This is incredibly useful experience. Like some of the best architects I had are actually people that have tried like to be startup, led different teams, and then decided to go to architecture. This experience of really going in these non-typical roles is incredibly useful in the settings like I'm working with.
Well, I'm curious because most organizations that I talk to, will have a separate kind of architecture team, a separate platform team. Though there is, of course, little bits of, there's clear overlaps, there's clear bits of collaboration, but I think it's not so clear yet, kind of industry wide, what the best practice for collaboration between an architect team and a platform team is. And I'm curious from your perspective, like, should these be one team? Like, should the platform team also be the architects and be thinking about all these things, or should they be two teams that really closely collaborate? I'm curious your thoughts on kind of what you think an idea of a best practice might be.
Yeah, there are, I would say, two aspects. So one is, I would say, career paths, and the other is organizational one. So I personally always model architecture roles on Staff Plus model. So I look at architects as someone who is has strong engineering background, and then decided to level up or expand the horizons there. So I think in that aspect, I think that we should have more aligned career paths in architecture, platform engineering, product teams, in the sense that expectations of Staff Plus engineers should be the same. Now, what is changed is the scope and where you put people and what mandate you give them. So you have maybe similar expectations, similar background, similar skills, but the scope will be different. So I would say in platform engineering, you have building a basically internal product with very clear customers and the KPIs related, to what it means to be successful, while as a kind of staff plus engineer in an architecture center of excellence, your goal is helping teams to understand the big picture, leveraging execution, leveling up people in different ways. So what I do think is you probably need. So I would say I would not create silos where people develop independently. I think we need to create career paths that are similar and create opportunities for people to move around, either from like building concrete product, building foundation of this product, or helping teams to get the big picture align or level up, and actually maybe even have like mandatory rotation. So what in our case, what I think what works is you should not stay too long, like having like 10 years working just as in one part. So I think it's beneficial if you work some time building products, then maybe work as an architect, then maybe go back to the platform to actually bake this in, then go back maybe into product for some challenging product. So I think what, as an organization, I think we need to think about this holistically, create opportunities for people, not put them in one box, create opportunities, and also then put clear priorities where in each phase you'll need more. So for instance, when you start transformation, normally you need much more alignment. So you'll need maybe stronger architecture center of excellence. You want best engineers to work together to understand the big picture to prevent us making some big mistakes. Once when you need to reach some business goals, you then prioritize product. Once when you at some phase of transformation, you maybe want to accelerate building a platform. So you need to maybe concentrate effort in that aspect. You always keep, I would say, this kind of product alignment, platform aspects, but the balance may be different. Priority should be different, but you never should prevent movings around that. So that's kind of my, I would say, 2 cents on these aspects. It's always challenging because you need to take individual career and aspirations, but I don't believe in like isolated silos with very independent, clear architecture path versus platform engineering path versus product. There is, of course, specialties, differences, but you need to have enough common ground.
Yeah, and I think the overlap is something that has worked very well for people. You know, it's never a bad thing when people in the platform team have architecture in mind and are thinking about architecture. And it's also definitely not a bad thing if your architecture people and architect team are able to really understand that platform and platform vision and platform strategy. And I think that, you know, that moving around within the organization, even if you don't have the opportunity to slot into new roles, but so much of platform engineering involves lots of communication and interactivity between different stakeholders. And the more that you are thinking about that, the better, whatever kind of role you are, dear listener. I think in the description below, I'll make sure to put a link to Željko's book, Grounded Architecture, because I think it covers a lot of quite interesting stuff in there for those of you who are not architects yet and maybe would like to or better understand it, or for any platform leader really is something to think about. But before we go, we're a little bit over where I have the deadline, but there's no way I was going to stop this at 30 minutes. There's just too much I want to get to. So I want to just close out with one kind of grasp really for some advice from you on these organizations that are in a constant state of transformation. I think, you know, whether it's acquisitions, whether it's mergers, whether it's divestitures, or whether it's kind of just massive digital transformation, particularly in this kind of AI world that we're in. And also, you know, fantastic, we made it 38 minutes, and this is the very first mention of AI. But, you know, when we think about many of our organizations, they're all in transformation right now. This is a great age of transformation. And I'm curious, for someone who has had to deal with lots of transformation, what would your advice to platform leaders be? What should they be thinking about for the next kind of 6 to 18 months?
This is always difficult to give like a recipe here, but I maybe give like a couple of closing remarks. The first is, I think whatever you're doing, I think it makes sense to commit and do it with full energy and motivation, even though you're aware that things may change quickly in 6, 12 months. I think that's number one. Keep your energy invested, work as there's longer term perspective, but still be open for radical changes. Because if you don't bring this energy, you always be this reluctant, waiting, like permanent skeptic apart. The second is also, I would say, dare to make decisions and learn from it, so be able to require quickly. As I said, people in this kind of transformation business prefer that clear change, which is not favorable, to uncertainty. Uncertainty is something that kills a lot of things here. And the last is, I would say, data. Like ground architecture you mentioned here, I really prioritize lots of usage of data. So there is no way you can avoid it's impossible to make any meaningful decision without really relying lots on data. I would say the main aspect I want to emphasize is really creating a graph of data that connects technical data, so source code, cloud billing reports, with business and product data. So you look at vibrancy, investments, EBITDA, and try to get this link, because this graph will help you a lot to, even if you make mistakes, at least to quickly understand that you make a mistake, and then you can take it from there. But this is in a nutshell kind of free piece of advice. Of course, there are many other ones, but I would say I talked a lot about problems, but this is actually I really enjoyed these kind of challenges. It's a great challenge. There's lots of value you can create, even if if you just bring like 10% of intended transformation, it could still create lots of value. And now with AI, I think this could change also a bit as well, because timelines are collapsing. So now, as I said, this investment window of 4 or 5 years may be something where you need to invest. But with AI, you can actually make a couple of rounds of transformation, which frequently would not be possible within the investment window. And I'm also curious to see how it will affect my work and work of other platform leaders.
Me too. I think with that awesome closing bit of advice and thoughts, thank you so much, Željko. This was absolutely awesome.
Thank you, Sam.
I definitely learned a lot. And as soon as we talked that first time, I was like, I need to get you on here. I think this will be super valuable for everyone. And if it is, make sure to reach out and let me know. I love to hear the nice words. So thanks so much, Željko. And thanks everybody for watching.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.